Hey, before we get into today's episode, I would like to apologize for the audio quality. We are going to have a lot of tinniness and then a lot of volume issues where some parts of Derek's recording were really hard to pick up. It's going to pitch up because I tried to bring more volume where I could on certain areas. It's going to pitch down in certain areas because I just couldn't get it all the way there without spending a bajillion hours detail working it. So we apologize. We hope this doesn't happen again. This is because we recorded in person for the first time and we weren't fully equipped to do that based on sound leakage and a lot of other stuff. So we apologize and we hope you enjoy it still.
Hello, and welcome back to the Alexander Society. This is a podcast where we drink and we talk about history, and please hold your applause. We touch grass.
Every time.
We touch grass. You know where we are right now?
We're at my place. This is our first in-person live recording of the Alexander Society podcast.
We are face to face. I'm looking right at you with contempt and scorn, and you get to see every flame and ember of hatred in my eyes as I tell you this story. Isn't that exciting?
You need to work on your passion because I've dealt with worse by looking in the mirror, bitch.
Oh no. Oh, God.
So, Derek, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Oh, getting out here was a fucking nightmare. Anyways, how are you doing, Tim? I hope better than me.
I'm doing pretty good. Today's day one of my vacation. You would know because I'm dragging you along through it on your weekend.
Yeah.
We're going down to see Small Town Murder tomorrow down in Dallas with my mom and dad because my little brother got a new job and can't go. It does, but like my adoptive brother, whatever you want to call us, is going with, so that's fine. And then last night, I went and saw Godzilla -1.
But never heard of it.
It's literally the newest Godzilla from Toho. It's the Japanese. It's like
Oh, okay.
it's the first new Godzilla movie since Shin Godzilla. So Derek, what are you drinking tonight?
Oh God, we got a lot of stuff. But the main stuff I've got out at the moment, I've got for my beer. I found this stuff and I was super excited about it because my sister told me about it. She had it. It's Austin East Cider's pineapple cider. It's 5%. They are from Austin, Texas. That makes sense. So yeah, it's like a pineapple cider. Kind of disappointing so far. Not nearly as good as I was expecting.
He's also been complaining about a scent about it, but it just smells like cider.
Okay, yeah. To me, the smell, it sounds like a stale old porta potty that's been out in the summer sun for a while. That's what it smells like to me, and it kind of pisses me off. I don't know why, and I don't know why you don't smell it. I don't know what's fucked up about my sinuses, but it doesn't smell good, and it's kind of whatever, because it is a pleasant flavor. I do like it. Not as much as I was hoping I would, but I do like it. But it's the smell. Every time I go to take a sip, the smell comes. I don't know why it smells like that. Anyways, for my shots, I've got two guys out at the moment.
Because he's a fucking heathen.
Yeah. The first one is a little thing that it's the famous grouse. It's that stuff that you didn't like.
I really it's turned to my stomach.
Okay. Which makes me very excited because it's an oaky whiskey with a little bit of sweetness, which are two things that I very much like. So I'm hoping that I like this. That's a 40%. And then
He's got this heathen juice.
fucking Godzilla rum. This is Gosling's 151 proof Black Seal Bermuda Black Rum. Like it says, 151 proof. That's 75.5% alcohol by volume. This is the most
Yeah, it sounds scary. It looks scary.
This is the most heavily alcoholic drink that I have ever had since I was in college. So yeah, this stuff, I'm very excited about it. I'm very terrified of it. I don't even care if it tastes bad. I'm just excited about how much alcohol it has in it. So yeah, that's what I've got for the moment. I might pull out some other stuff from your fridge if I decide I want to mix. Tim.
So my sipper tonight is going to be Orange-a-Tang. It's a hard soda, orange soda, and it tastes amazing. I've taken a couple sips while getting everything set up. It is brewed by American Soleria, and it's a collaboration between them and Tripping Animals Brewing. I don't know if that's a brewery or maybe like it. It sounds more like the way they're implying on this label is I think it's more like a soda, like a craft soda company. I could be wrong, and it is a 5%.
If you've ever wanted a soda that's just a beer, that sounds great. I'm gonna if you have any left, I'm gonna take it.
And then for my liquor tonight, I'm going back to that tequila from last week. It's Espinita tequila. Again, it's 100 proof, 100% agave, not 100 proof, and it is 40% alcohol, so that'd be 80 proof, right? So someone died, a very infamous war criminal.
Oh, it's just all crabs on. It's all crabs on the timeline. All crabs. Let's pull out the what are those memes called? The Pat Gang. Rest in piss, bozo.
New gender neutral bathroom just opened. His gravestone.
Thank God for our new gender neutral bathroom. Who is it? Who died?
Henry Kissinger.
Henry Kissinger. He is fucking dead at 100 years old. Wish it had happened 80 years ago.
It should have happened sooner, yes. But in honor of his death, because we hated the fucking piece of shit, we're going to take an extra shot right here, right now.
Yeah, I'm going with the Goslings for Kissinger's shot because, God, like Anthony Bourdain said,
it was on site.
Yeah, basically. If you have ever visited Cambodia, you will live the rest of your life with the strong urge to beat Henry Kissinger to death. And unfortunately, we no longer get that opportunity, but hey, at least he's dead. So, bros.
Yeah. Cheers. So, Derek, where are we returning to?
Oh, yes, we are returning to the Middle Ages. We're coming back to a classic ongoing series for our show. Today, we're going to be hopping into the second installment of our series on the Crusades.
We have gone back to the Holy Land.
We're going back to the Holy Land, and let me tell you what, this is one of the shittiest, dumbest little crusades that we're probably going to talk. It was short, it was stupid. Some interesting characters. We're going to talk about some interesting people in this one. But, God, this has to be one of the dumber. I say that, and then my mind keeps coming back to the Fourth Crusade. Man, I'm never going to get over the Fourth Crusade.
It's funny, because I know jack shit about the Crusades except for what you've told me.
Man, you are going to...
Gonna be angry?
Maybe, yeah. It's so fucking mind-bogglingly stupid that it might just the sheer amount of human death for literally just
shits and gigs.
Shits and giggles. Like I said, the Fourth Crusade, they were aiming for Egypt. They never reached Egypt. Instead, they destroyed the Byzantine Empire.
What?
Yeah.
How do you go for Egypt and hit Byzantine Empire instead?
Because you owe a debt to Venice. This is not about the Fourth Crusade. This is about the Second Crusade, which is one of the dumber crusades. It's very silly, very nonsensical thing that happened. And it ends unfathomably anticlimactic. It's so much buildup with absolutely no payoff. It's so frustrating to read about because it has all of the same sort of like dramatic buildup that the First Crusade does, and then it just ends with a whim.
It just peters out.
It just peters out, and it's so frustrating to read about.
So, Derek, let's get back into our rules so that people know what we're working with this week.
Yeah. So, rule number 1, every time the Germans get fucked, we take a sip.
Rule 2, every time... Is that Eleanor? Rule 2, every time Eleanor is mentioned, 3 sips.
And rule number 3, every time history from the First Crusade comes up in our story, we're going to take a shot.
Hell yeah. To start us off, let's go get our starting shot done.
Yeah, let's do that.
Cheers.
Prost. So, the First Crusade ended off pretty successfully. They established a few Crusader states. We got the Kingdom of Jerusalem. We got Antioch. We got Edessa, and we got Tripoli. So we got the 4 Crusader states out of it. The most powerful being the Kingdom of Jerusalem. They've got because that Jerusalem has always been a pretty wealthy area, and they had a pretty large pool of manpower to draw from, so they could field some pretty powerful armies for the area. But the most politically influential was the county of Edessa. That was kind of the big one that everybody really cared about. But the problem was it was the most sparsely populated, so it was pretty economically and militarily weak because they didn't have a lot of just stuff to draw from.
Okay.
So after we get the first crusade in 1101, we got like sort of a miniature crusade that was just trying to kind of. It wasn't officially declared by the church. It was just a. It was a bunch of guys that had run away from the first crusade. It was made up of a bunch of guys that had run away and deserted from the first crusade. And when they got home, they were all like shamed and scorned as cowards and traitors when they got back home.
I was about to call them the yellow belly scum.
Yeah, and so they went back to try to redeem themselves. And basically their goal was to kind of...
they were trying to be like Zuko from the Avatar, regain his honor?
Yeah, it didn't end well. Yeah, they ended up like every other Crusader army that ends up in Asia Minor and Anatolia. They get dehydrated and they outrun their supply lines, so they end up starving. And then they get picked off piecemeal by a bunch of Seljuk horse archers. It didn't end well. But that was one. Peter the Hermit actually came along for that one too.
I'll take a drink in honor of my boy Peter the Hermit.
Oh, Peter the Hermit, the best man that has ever lived. Yeah, so that crusade, once again, Crusaders keep getting those L's because we got the big dub when.
Is that going to be a running gag throughout the Crusades? Is the Crusaders get the fat L?
Oh, it's all L's. It's just a long cast. The only dubs they get is the fourth Crusade.
And that was the worst one, is what you were saying.
And it's the dumbest. It's the dumbest dub that they could possibly have ever gotten. Other than that, it's just all L's. Richard the Lionheart, when we get to the Third Crusade, he was pretty cool. He did pretty well. He still lost, but he's probably the most competent Crusader of all of the Crusades. Okay, so yeah, that Crusade, that little itty bitty like Crusade 1.5, it comes to be called the Crusade of the Faint-Hearted,
and it was basically just an epic fail. You were saying, right?
Yeah, it was a big nothing burger. They went to try and take a bunch of cities in Anatolia, and didn't get any of them. So yeah, that's pretty much like where we're at going into like the 1140s, which is when this happens. It's like 1147, 1148. We've got the 4 Crusader states, and they're just kind of like hanging out doing like regular stuff, but they're surrounded by hostile Muslim forces, mainly like the Seljuks, like the Turkic sort of sultanate. So yeah, these Crusader states are just doing like random, like just regular country stuff, like
They're day-to-day operations bullshit.
Yeah, like they're even like allying with like neighboring like different lords within like the Seljuk realm against one another because they're all always trying to kill each other too. So it's a lot of them are like even allying with like Muslim forces.
By the way, for clarification, when we're mentioning the 1.5 Crusade, we don't count it as mentioning the first Crusade for our shot, just for the audience at home who were being semantic assholes.
Yeah, it wasn't nothing. We wouldn't have been able to make a full. So yeah, like I said, Edessa is the most prominent one. At this time, Edessa's 4th ruler. We're about 4 generations in ruler wise. It's about 40 years after 2 generations. We're on the 4th ruler of the county of Edessa. This guy named Joscelin.
Joscelin. I've never heard of that.
He's Joscelin II. He started some beef with the other Crusader states. They stopped supporting him, and so that ended up forcing him to ally with a Muslim Turkic lord by the name. They were called the Ordokids. Just a local like sort of like semi-nomadic warlord that was kind of a vassal under the Seljuks. He ended up allying with them to fight against. And so Joscelin and the Ordokids ended up teaming up, and they wanted to fight against this guy he was the Atabeg of Mosul, this guy named Zengi. So basically, he controlled Mosul and Iraq. And they wanted to go and attack Aleppo, which was a city that he had just recently captured, because it was a pretty strategically important area to get to Edessa. So if you controlled Aleppo, then it'd be a lot harder to attack Edessa.
It was purely strategic, is what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. And so he wanted to secure Aleppo in friendly hands. And so he and the Ordokids kind of teamed up, and they went to try and take Aleppo. But while they were out, the forces of Mosul just kind of went around their armies. Yeah, they just went around, and he conquered Edessa.
Just like that.
Yeah, he
said, "Fuck you guys, I'll do it anyway."
Yeah, and so that's how Edessa, it's gone now. It's never coming back. Just like that. Yeah, the very first Crusader state, that's how it ended. And so when word of this came back to, you have the Pope at the time, Pope Eugene II. Which, Pope Eugene found out about the fall of Edessa. And at the time, Eugene, much like the Pope during the First Crusade, Pope Eugene II was not in Rome.
I didn't think Rome was a super... I thought Rome, as in the Vatican, was a not super modern, but more modern take, as in like maybe 1700s thing.
Oh no, the Pope has been in Rome since the very beginning.
Wait, he has?
Because it was the center of the Roman Empire. Yeah, it was one of the 5 seats of the Pentarchy, and the Pope was one of the five patriarchs of the Christian Church. And then, yeah, like in the early church, you had basically 5 popes. There was one in Rome, one in Constantinople, Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria.
Did they call them all popes, or were they different terms?
No, the only one that was called pope was the one in Rome, but all 5 were called patriarchs. You lost 3 of them, so the ones in Alexandria, Antioch, once they were conquered by the Muslims, and so you only had the one in Rome and the one in Constantinople, and they had a split. So that's where you get the Western Latin Catholic Church and the Eastern Greek Orthodox Church.
Okay.
So the patriarch in Istanbul today, he's still referred to as the Patriarch of Constantinople, and he is still the leader of the.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Eugene, much like the Pope during the First Crusade, he was not in Rome at the time. He had been exiled from Rome because at the time you had this thing called the Commune of Rome.
The Commune of Rome. What is that?
So around this time, there was this giant popular revolt in the city of Rome that were fighting against the increasing amounts of political power that the Pope had over the city of Rome. And so there was this giant rebellion within the city that drove the Pope out. And they established a new municipal government of the city that was based on the old senatorial system of the Roman Republic.
So what you're saying is they essentially overthrew the Pope temporarily?
They didn't overthrow him. They just sent him into exile. He was still leading the whole church. He just wasn't doing it from Rome.
So what you're saying is he had his religious influence, but it's not his political influence within within the Roman state.
Yeah, he still had his religious influence, but his religious and political influence were kind of stymied because his influence was very heavily
based on his political power.
His political and religious power were interconnected, and they were reliant on him.
I argue they're still very hardly connected.
Yeah, definitely. They've always been very heavily connected. Eugene is not currently in Rome, and that's a problem for his political power and his religious power.
Inextricably tied together.
And a heavy amount of his political power is based on his ability to project the will of God, and that's dependent on him being in the Vatican.
Is there any dogma on why the Vatican is positioned in Rome, or is it just historical? Just so happened to be there.
I think the kind of perspective on it is that it's part of it is Rome is kind of seen as a city of martyrs. So it's where a lot of early Christian martyrs were killed. And another part of it is just because it was an early outpost for Christian communities, because it was such a central part of the Roman Empire. It's really easy to evangelize out from.
So it's a historical significance rather than a religious significance.
Yeah, but it's a historical significance that is interpreted as a religious significance. So when he's out of Rome and he hears about the fall of Edessa, He same thing as the last crusade. He sees this as a golden opportunity to kind of shore up his power in a vulnerable moment. And so he issues this thing. It's called a papal bull, which is a bull is basically just like the Pope says something is now Catholic dogma, and it becomes.
So it's the Pope's version of an executive order?
Pretty much, yeah. He issues one. It's called the Quantum Predecessoris, and it basically it's just a bull that's directly targeted at the King of France, Louis VII, and it says it's actually like he basically saying like, hey, can you take some knights and go retake Edessa for me?
So he's being nice, saying, hey, can you help me out?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, do the church a solid and go reclaim this Crusader state for us. And so that's how he issues a new crusade. So Louis gets that, and he's like, because at the time he was already planning on going on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem anyways. So he was like, if I'm on the way there, and he at first he wasn't really interested, but he was kind of like, I'm on my way over there anyways, so I might as well take an army with me.
So you're saying that Louis decided, like, fuck it, I'm going there anyway. I'll help him out.
Yeah, pretty much. He's like, get on the church's good side, go gain some glory and wealth for myself.
So it was more politically motivated than religiously motivated, is what you're saying?
Here's the thing you got to understand about this is, at this time, religion served the same function that ideology does now. So it's not when he's doing their political.
I argue they're still the same.
Kind of, yeah. When he does something that is religiously motivated, it can also be politically motivated, because in this time period, religion and politics are very almost the same thing. Yeah. So like something that is religiously good is very oftentimes politically good, and vice versa, because they are kind of interconnected. So doing something that's beneficial for his own power, that's also good for the church, is in his own mind a righteous, like, good Christian thing to do.
It is the pious thing to do.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, he starts planning. I should also mention now, at this time, he is married to a woman by the name of Eleanor.
Let's go ahead and take those sips. Yep.
Yeah, so Eleanor, her name is Eleanor of Aquitaine. She is a fucking fascinating woman. I can't believe I forgot about her. When I've been trying to think of like more women subjects to do. So at this current moment, she is the Queen of France. Before her death, before her death, she's also going to be the Queen of England.
Wow.
No, it's separate times. They get divorced later. Or technically divorce is the right word, but technically it's annulled by the Pope. The Pope annuls their marriage. She's one of the only known women crusaders that we have records of, because she's going to go on the second crusade.
Well, she is a actual crusader.
Technically, yeah. We don't know if she ever like commanded troops or anything like that, but she was there. She was there, and she was definitely like a political leader of the second crusade. And also, she is also the mother of King Richard the Lionheart.
I've heard that name, but I don't recognize that name.
Yeah, we're going to talk a whole lot about it when we do the Third Crusade, because the Third Crusade's the big famous crusade that everybody knows about. That's when you get Richard the Lionheart, you get Saladin, you get the assassins, you get all the stuff that everybody knows about the crusade. That's the third. And Richard the Lionheart's probably the most famous and most successful of the crusaders. Or I wouldn't say successful, like most famous crusader, definitely. Also, Richard the Lionheart and his younger brother John is the antagonist in the stories of Robin Hood. So Eleanor's sons are together one of the most famous crusaders and the bad guy from Robin Hood.
Interesting.
Yeah, we've got Eleanor, and we've got Louis, Louis the Seventh. And so Louis is deciding he's going to go ahead and lead this next crusade that they're going to be doing. And at the same time, you also get this guy. His name is Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. Is where we get Saint Bernards from. I'm fairly sure. But Saint Bernard was basically just he was like a monk, and he was very supportive of this whole crusade thing. And he decided to go on a speaking tour, or more like a preaching tour for this. This one's the most famous Saint Bernard, the most influential one. And he went on like a preaching tour through France and Germany, just going from town to town preaching like the good word of the crusade, talking to lords, trying to rile up support, and especially tell me if this sounds familiar. As he's going through Germany, everywhere he goes, there's like anti-Semitic pogroms. It's when a whole town full of people go to the Jewish neighborhood and kill a bunch of people and burn the whole place down.
So it was mini genocides.
Yeah, it's a little miniature Holocaust. It happened all the time in the Middle Ages. Yeah, the exact same thing happened in the First Crusade. When Peter the Hermit went preaching through Germany and started the People's Crusade, and as they got riled up in religious fervor, the first thing they did was they go and started killing Jews. And the same thing happened this time around when Saint Bernard went through Germany. But to Bernard's credit, when this started to happen, he came back and basically told everybody to cut it out because it was really bad and he didn't like it. So he did actually stop the pogroms so they didn't get as bad as they did at the start of the First Crusade. So Bernard's preaching did cause some pogroms, but he came back and put the kibosh on that, and they stopped pretty quickly. Yeah, so good on him. Credit where credit's due. He did nip that in the bud. During that preaching tour, there was also a lot of miracles that were attributed to him. Like wherever he went, there's stories about him healing people and stuff like that. It's part of the reason why he eventually became a saint, is because he had all of these miracles attributed to him. But his trip to Germany helped get the King of Germany, Conrad III, the Holy Roman Emperor, got him on board, and he came along as part of the Crusade. So the Second Crusade.
Damn, they had the Holy Roman Emperor following them along?
Yeah, this was the Second Crusade is this is the first time you actually get kings, actual rulers of entire kingdoms coming along, lead these crusades. The first one was just a lot of minor nobles. So yeah, now we've got Conrad III, the King of Germany and the Holy Roman Emperor. He's on board now, and he's bringing along his nephew. You've probably never heard of this guy in particular, but you might have heard the name before. It's a guy named Frederick Barbarossa.
I've heard Barbarossa before.
Yeah, this is the guy that later on during World War II, the Nazi invasion of Russia, of the Soviet Union, gets called Operation Barbarossa. It's named after this guy. So he's going to go off and he's going to do a crusade, and after the Second Crusade, he's going to go on and become the Holy Roman Emperor himself.
Damn.
So yeah, we've got all of our pieces set. We've got all of our
the dominoes are set up. Let's knock them over, Derek. Tell us.
So we'll start where the first bits of violence actually started happening, and that is actually not even going to be in the Holy Land. It actually got really started in Spain,
España.
Yep, because right around this time is when. Have you ever heard of the Reconquista?
No, I have not. What is the Reconquista?
The Reconquista was this long, 700-year process of Christians reconquering the Iberian Peninsula because for about 700 years it was controlled by Muslim emirates.
Interesting.
And so at this time, the only Christian presence, Christian rulers in Spain, were kind of in the northern part. So in the west. In the west, you had the Kingdom of Asturias and the brand new just kind of came around Kingdom of Portugal. The Pope kind of retroactively makes this portion of the Reconquista part of the Second Crusade. So
was it not the same group of people as part of the crusade, or was this like...
So it was part of, so in Spain it was like the Spaniards and the Portuguese, and then also the English. So the English would come over and they would help in the Iberian part of the Second Crusade. And then once they were done there, they would leave and go to the Holy Land and help with that part of the main part of the crusade. But the Spanish wouldn't be involved in that part, but the English who fought in Spain, if that makes sense. Yeah. So there were a bunch of like English troops that set off from Dartmouth, the port at Dartmouth, but they were knocked off course by a storm and they were forced to make port at the city of Porto, which was at the time the capital of Portugal. And once they were there, the King of Portugal went to them and asked, "Hey, since you're here and you've got lots of sharp swords, you mind helping us kind of conquer some land down here real quick from the Muslims? Because that's what you're going to be going and doing anyways." And they were like, "Yeah, fuck it, why not?" So this was 1147 is when the Second Crusade starts. And basically, more or less, the opening move is the capture of the city of Lisbon. So the English and Portuguese troops go down and they capture. It stays in Portuguese hands all the way to this day. It is now the capital of Portugal.
Wow, nice.
And at the same time that's happening, the Spanish are also moving down. They're capturing a bunch of major important cities as well. And so this portion of the Second Crusade ended up being pretty successful.
Is the only successful part?
This is the last success you are going to hear about in this episode.
So technically, before it was even really started, this was the only success.
Yes.
Fuck.
Yeah. Pretty. Yeah.
It sounds like, from everything you've told me in passing about the Crusades, it sounds like the Crusades were just a bunch of bumbling idiots the whole way through.
100%. Yes, it was almost universally just failure on the part of the Crusaders. It was all failure. The only successes the Crusaders ever had was the First Crusade or against other Christians. Yeah, so the English that helped the Portuguese capture Lisbon, like half of that Crusader army just decided to stay in Lisbon. And they just settled there and they lived there for the rest of their lives.
So what you're saying, before their Crusades even partially finished, they handicapped themselves by cutting themselves in half?
Yeah. The English part of the army does, but they're not like a big major part of the Second Crusade. They're a relatively small portion. They're more important in Spain than they are. It might have been partially because half their army stayed. But yeah, they settled in Portugal because during the siege of Lisbon, they all got like pretty wealthy because they just sacked the city. And then after that, Lisbon was depopulated of Muslims, and so they needed to restock it with Christians. And so they had a golden opportunity with all of this wealth and a heavily like Christian absent city. They had an opportunity to become like very powerful, prominent citizens. So there's a lot of like very prominent. There are still families to this day in Portugal that
trace their lineage back.
Yeah, trace their wealth, their political power, and their lineage all the way back to these English families that settled in Lisbon. Yeah, it's a thing. This also started the what is now kind of recognized today as the longest standing treaty of friendship and military alliance between two countries in human history.
Holy crap! That's a long time.
Yeah, this sort of period, because of this aid that the English gave to Portugal in conquering Lisbon. Portugal and England ended up forming like a military alliance that is still active more or less to this. So yeah, that is the last success we are going to hear about in this crusade. So relish it while you. So the main part of the Crusader army, which is the French and the German, they team up, and Conrad, the King of Germany, wants to take, instead of getting on ships, he wants to take the overland route through Hungary and then down through the Byzantine Empire. We're bringing back the Byzantine Empire. This is going to, once again, just like all of these stories, all of the Crusader stories, they're all going to end badly for the Byzantines. The Byzantines were the actual, like, true victims of all of the Crusades, whether directly or indirectly.
So they were, like, right up there with the Muslims being victims of the Crusades?
Yeah. Individual Muslims or, like, smaller Muslim kingdoms were victimized by the Crusades. By and large, the entirety, the holistic, like, being of the entire Eastern Roman Byzantine civilization were victimized by every single crusade.
I honestly feel bad for them.
Yeah, I don't know if I could feel bad for them because, they were the Byzantines. They were kind of a fucked up culture, but yeah. So Conrad wants to go through Hungary, down through the Byzantine Empire into Asia Minor to get to Edessa. This is controversial because, especially to some of the larger forces that are kind of getting involved, the Kingdom of Sicily brings a bunch of troops and they want to get involved, but they hate the Byzantines and they don't want to go through the Byzantine Empire to get on this crusade because they're actively hostile towards the Byzantines. They've been in long conflict with them. Same thing with, I think, we talked about, I can't remember his name now, but the Italo-Norman guy, the real bastard who actually, the Italian Norman guy that really hated the Byzantines and kind of fucked everyone over during the First Crusade.
Do you know how long it's been since we did the First Crusade, sir?
No, I can't remember. I know it's been a while.
It's been at least 9 months.
But yeah, so the Sicilians and the Byzantines are kind of hostile towards one another. So he doesn't want to go through the Byzantine. He doesn't want to go through Constantinople to get on this crusade. He just wants to go by sea. Louis VII, he agrees and thinks that they should take the overland route. And so once they agree, the Sicilians pull out. So that's a pretty sizable chunk of the Crusader army that's already gone, and they haven't even set off yet. And so the
damn, it sounds like this crusade just gets crippled right there at the beginning twice in a row.
Yeah, it's doomed from the start. So the Germans set off first under Conrad. They reach Byzantine territory first, and then there's a long series of unfortunate events that a bunch of mutual distrust between the Byzantines and the German army that eventually culminates in what becomes called the Battle of Constantinople, because basically the Germans were coming in and Conrad told his army no looting while we're coming through here. These are Christians. Wait till we get to Muslim territory. But they went and looted anyways. And so that pissed off the Byzantine Emperor Manuel I.
Understandably so.
Yeah, that happens. They try to talk this out. That doesn't work. And so they get into this giant pitched battle outside the walls of Constantinople that results in 15,000 deaths. Pretty bad. And then after this battle, Conrad just takes his army and passes over into Asia Minor. And so now they're well on their way to the crusade. Instead of waiting for the French to catch up to them, because the French left a little later, they beeline for the city of Iconium, which is the capital of one of the Muslim territories in the area called the Sultanate of Rum. But on the way there, again, Anatolia, this is summer in Anatolia. It's dry. It's hot. There's not a lot of stuff around.
Why are you describing Oklahoma?
Imagine Oklahoma, but with a higher elevation.
Okay.
That's what Anatolia is. That's like Turkey. Actually, I guess, no, think New Mexico.
Ew.
Yeah. Turkey is the New Mexico of the Mediterranean. So, yeah, they beeline for the city of Iconium. They're weakened by the march because,
inadequate supplies.
Yeah. So to try and relieve their supply lines, they split their army in two.
How exactly would that relieve their supply lines? Because their supply lines would have to now go to two different places instead of one.
Because if their supplies are only going to one place, then there's only so many carts and wagons you can put on that road. That ended up being bad because with their army split up, one half of the army was cut off.
Was ambushed?
Yes, it was ambushed, and it was almost completely destroyed at the Battle of Dorylaeum in October of 1147. And then the other half started starving to death, and then they were ambushed, and they were pretty much completely destroyed, functionally non-existent anymore by other Turkic forces in November of 1147. It's a month later.
That sounds like the end of the crusade at that point.
That's just the German part. The French are still coming behind them.
So what you're saying is Germans got fucked?
Yes, the Germans did get fucked. Yep. I think we missed a shot earlier.
What would have it been? History of the crusade comes up.
The pogroms in Germany.
Yes, we did not take a shot for the pogroms.
Prost.
Cheers.
So the Germans, Conrad's half of the army there's still some of them left. And so they're forced to retreat and go meet up with the French. So there's still like a very small like German portion of the army. Conrad's still one of the main commanders, but they lost a big chunk of their army in this whole kerfuffle. A quarter, yeah, probably closer to a quarter. Yeah, you start out with like 50,000, you end with like 7,000. That's how Crusades go. So after that, the French arrive in Byzantium. So by the time, because of all of the shit that the Germans had done when they were crossing through Byzantium.
So what you're saying is the Germans fucked around and found out?
Yeah, but we already took a shot for that.
I know, but you were mentioning how they did shit, and I was assuming they did more than just like the battle. They kind of fucked around.
No, at this point, most of whoever's left of the German armies are scattered, and they're falling back to Constantinople to meet back up with the French. The French arrive, and by this point, Manuel I has actually signed a truce with Seljuk Turkic guys that the German army was at that time fighting, which was not a good look for the Byzantines, which we'll get to at the end of the episode. That had some consequences. But the Byzantines signed a truce with Rome because if they signed a truce with Rome, they wouldn't have to focus so many of their forces on defending the frontier against the Muslims, and they could turn them to address some raiding that was going on in their territories at that time from the Sicilians, who had abandoned the crusade before it even set off. And so they decided to spend their time instead going and invade and raiding Greece, raiding Byzantine Greece, just to fuck with the Byzantines. And so it was a little tense when the French showed up because the Byzantines were pretty militarized. Their army was more being mobilized, and so the French thought, "Oh, are they coming out to fight us?" But then, like the diplomats and the emissaries, like they started doing their stuff. And it turns out Manuel I was a little more friendly to the French, and so they were able to come in. The city of Constantinople threw this huge sort of party to welcome the French in, and so the French were able to cross over without a hitch. They were fine. They got through Constantinople. They got over to Asia Minor, and then they went and they teamed up with what was left of the Germans. And so at first, this sort of portion, like now we're getting into like the main, like it is all the way to Jerusalem. It starts off all right at first. So the French and the Germans, they team up and they actually defeat a Seljuk army at the Battle of Ephesus in December of 1147. But then they get on the road. They take the road south so they don't have to go across the Anatolian plateau, barren with no water or food anywhere. And so they take the southern route across southern Anatolia until they arrive in like a city on like the southwestern portion of Anatolia called Adalia, which has a nice big open port. And they get there in like early 1148. The entire time they're marching, they're being constantly harassed by Seljuk horse archers. They're just coming up, they're killing a bunch of guys, and then they're running off before the Crusaders can respond. And they're just doing that for months and months and months. So they're losing end up losing like several thousand guys to this. It's a pretty bad. So once they got to Adalia, they're like, yeah, we're not going to be putting up with all of this, horse archer like being killed while we're walking sort of stuff anymore. We'll just wait out here. We'll order a bunch of ships and we'll go ahead and just wait for them. But it was winter in the Mediterranean, and it was, this part of like the Eastern Mediterranean is during the winter and spring months, it could get pretty stormy. And so the ships end up having a hard time getting to Adalia because it's, roiling seas, thunderstorms, stuff like that. And so only a few ships are actually able to arrive. And so basically what happened was Louis and Conrad, they took just all of their own guys and they got on the ships and then they went by boat. And then on their way out, they told the rest of yeah, y'all go ahead and just walk. We'll meet you there. Yeah, none of them made it. Yeah, none of the guys who went by foot, none of them made it. Louis and Conrad, they get to, so they sail off from Adalia. The French sail and they arrive at the city of Antioch, which is one of the four, or I guess at this point now, three major Crusader kingdoms. And they arrive in March of 1148. And Louis shows up and he's like, I'm not really feeling like this whole going to reconquer Edessa thing. I don't think I'm going to do that. Which
he literally gets partway through to get to Edessa and is like, fuck it, I don't care.
Pretty much, yeah. Like at this point, like he's still got his army. He's still going to do army stuff, but he's like
they're still going to crusade, but they were like, fuck Edessa.
Yeah, like the whole point of the crusade was to go and save Edessa. And at this point, he's just kind of like, not really feeling it. I kind of just want to go to Jerusalem and pray a little. At this point, it has some pretty immediate consequences because the leader of Antioch, Raymond of Poitiers, he thought that when Louis got there, he'd take his Crusader army and go help him capture the city of Aleppo, which, is an important strategic point for Antioch, both Antioch and Edessa, because it's one of the main kind of connecting points between all of these regions. And he thought that would be the main stepping stone to going back to Edessa and restoring Christian rule there. And so instead, he's like, "Nah, I'm not going to go try to take Aleppo. I'm just going to go down to Jerusalem and meet up with the guys down there." And that pisses off Raymond. Not a big fan of that. And so Raymond and Louis start to fight, like argue fight, not like army fight, like just arguing. They start to not get along with one another. This becomes exacerbated when rumors start to go around, which you remember Eleanor? She's here too. This sort of like brewing conflict between Louis and Raymond gets pumped full of steroids when a rumor starts going around that Eleanor is actually fucking Raymond, which is actually a real possibility. It's something that we might go over with Eleanor once we get to her episodes. We don't know if she was actually promiscuous, but she did have that reputation because of some of the stuff that she did in court. From what I understand, a lot of this rumor was kind of based on like
propaganda.
Well, it was based on already existing rumors at the time that were centered around like what she kind of did with her court, because her royal court that she kept for herself.
Wait, she had her own separate royal court?
Yeah, queens usually have their own separate like courtesans, and that she kind of keeps around.
I thought a courtesan was a hooker.
No, a courtesan is like a person that is part of a royal court. So yeah, anyways, there's this rumor going around that Eleanor might be fucking Raymond. It may have been true, it may have not been, but this suddenly turns the conflict between Louis and Raymond into a conflict between Louis and Eleanor. This crusade is not going to be good for their marriage.
No, I would have never guessed, Derek.
Yeah, there's a reason they eventually and it starts here.
Well, their marriage gets annulled by the Pope.
Yeah, and also part of it is that she never actually gives birth to a son when she's married to him.
Does she have any kids from him?
I think so. I think they have a couple daughters. I can't remember for sure. Yeah, this conflict within Tripoli between Louis and Raymond eventually kind of culminates. I'm not entirely sure how this actually happened. It's a long series of dumb events that eventually culminates in Eleanor gets arrested, and Eleanor is put under house arrest. Somehow the twisting and turnings of this fucking story. But yeah, so she's going to be in Tripoli for a while some of the main parts of this crusade are going on. So to kind of get out of Dodge before things really start to go like really bad in Tripoli, Louis goes ahead and takes his army and starts to move south so he can team up with Jerusalem and kind of meet up with them, merge their armies so that they can go and start doing like a proper good crusade, right? And while
doing a crusade proper, like, what do you mean?
Like go and get like the actual like targets that they want to do, because at this point this crusade has consisted of them trying to get to what they actually want to fight and want to conquer.
It's a continuously moving target.
No, they've got like
Well, wasn't it originally to reclaim the one holy city or conquered Crusade city, and then they change it, and it's just an ever-moving target from what you've told me so far?
yeah. Originally, the plan was to go and get Edessa, and then they actually get there and they're like, we don't really want to do anything with Edessa, and so they go and they're going to go and regroup in Jerusalem to decide what they're actually going to do. So they travel and so the French travel from Antioch down to Tripoli, and while they're on their way to Tripoli, there's another French force under the Count of Toulouse, this guy named Alfonso Jourdan, the Count of Toulouse. Alfonso was on his way, but he ended up dying en route. He just got sick and died while they were on their way there. And there is this conspiracy theory spreads throughout the Crusaders that Alfonso was actually poisoned to death by the leader of Tripoli, this guy named Raymond II, who is a different Raymond from the Raymond who leads Antioch. They're two different Raymonds. So yeah, there's this, because as it turns out, Alfonso Jourdan is actually Raymond II's uncle, and they hate each other. And Raymond II was afraid that if Alfonso showed up, that he'd try to usurp power in Tripoli. And so the conspiracy theory goes that Raymond II poisoned him while he was en route so that he wouldn't get there and try to take the throne. We don't know if that's true. It probably wasn't true, but everybody believes it's true, including the Crusaders.
They have to have a belief to fight for.
Yeah, and so all of those troops that are coming with Alfonso, they all believe that Alfonso was poisoned. And so they decide, okay, well, if these Crusader states are just going to poison our guy while we're coming to help them, then we're just going to turn around and go back to France. And so there goes their...
Fuck them, is what they said?
Yeah, there goes the Crusaders' reinforcements. They were going to get reinforced. That was a pretty, decent-sized army. It would have made up for a lot of their lost numbers. But nope, bye-bye. So the French pass through Tripoli, and they finally get down to Jerusalem. So yay, we're in Jerusalem again.
The Holy Land.
Yeah, so Louis goes and he does his typical pilgrim stuff. He visits all the major sites and churches and does a lot of praying and takes his shoes off to walk through the streets, stuff. Typical religious stuff. So he meets up at Jerusalem with the king of Jerusalem, Baldwin III, and they have a meeting outside of Jerusalem. So they meet up in Jerusalem and they decide, screw Edessa, screw Aleppo. We're not going to bother with any of that stuff, which was the whole point of the crusade in the first place.
So literally this crusade is a bunch of, fuck that.
Yeah, which if you remember was a big part of the first crusade as well. If you remember, that was a pretty big part of the first crusade too, was the reason that they had so many of these Crusader states was every time they'd conquer a new important city, one of the leaders would just stop moving and make himself like the new lord of that city. That's why we got...
That kind of feels like the reasonable understanding, if you're not following the Alexander the Great plan, is you put one of your people in charge and you take over. But literally this is a bunch of nah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, but the difference was the Macedonian army only had one king.
How does this keep on happening, though? How do they even still have people to continue the crusade from here? There's not even been any real battle.
Fuck if I know, dude. I have no... Life was so fucking boring back then. Then even if you're having the worst time of your life and you're scared to death of everything, at least something's going on. At least I get to do something that's not just the most boring existence possible. You know what I mean?
I'd rather not go to war than chicken out. How many times now? 3 or 4?
Maybe, but everybody was clinically insane back then. So to be fair, we're still clinically insane, but just in less like a psychotic way and more like a... So they decide instead that they're going to go, instead of Aleppo, they're going to go after Damascus, which is closer by near... Louis and Baldwin III of Jerusalem, they team up in Jerusalem. They merge their armies together and they decide we're going to go take Damascus. This turned out to be a very bad idea.
How bad idea?
Because of the way that the political thing was set up at the time. the ruler of Damascus, who was a Seljuk vassal, was hated by all of the other guys, all of the other Muslim lords around him. They were constantly fighting against one. But how do I explain this? It's so fucking complicated. It's a lot of political stuff, but basically, as long as the target was, without getting into the specifics, basically, if the target of the crusade was Edessa, then all of these guys were going to stay like separated and fighting against one another. But once the Crusaders came after Damascus, shit got real, and they decided to team up with one another to fight against the Crusaders. So they're going after Damascus now, and now all of the Muslim powers in the region. So yeah, this ended up being a pretty bad decision, all things considered, because they had at this point the Crusaders, bolstered by the forces, had about 50,000 troops total. All of the Muslim forces combined in the region came out to a little over 100,000. So not great. So yeah, they set off from they met up near the town of Acre, which was that Acre is an interesting town, an interesting city in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. It was basically like the prototypical Crusader city. It's really interesting because it's like the first sort of example of like settler colonialism that we ever see in practice. It's like
So it's kind of like the prototype for colonies.
yeah, basically, because what happened was
I would say dope, but colonies fucked over a lot of people.
yeah, it's historically interesting because it's fucking monstrous what happened, because basically all of the Muslims were expelled, and then they just brought a bunch of peasant people from Europe and settled them in the city. And Acre is going to be a pretty big part of the Third Crusade too. So yeah, they set off from Acre and they go to besiege the city of Damascus. And so the Crusader army, which is about 50,000 strong at this point, they arrive on July 13th, 1148, and they come at the city from the west, because the west is the best place to approach the city, because the route along the western part of the city is covered in like these rich, deep wells. It has a pretty high water table and has a whole bunch of like really rich, fertile orchards. So all the Crusaders can feed and stay hydrated while they're besieging this side of the city.
Sounds super convenient for them, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, it was a pretty good setup. If they'd stayed there, it probably would have gone different.
So what you're saying is they still fucked this up.
Yeah, they still fucked this up. They decided that they'd go around to the other side of the city on the eastern side, where
And got their ass wrecked with no lube.
we're getting to that. Here's the thing. Okay, I'll explain. It was a barren wasteland on the eastern side of the city, but they decided to go over there because that's where the walls were the weakest. The problem was they didn't have the time to actually exploit the weaknesses in the walls, because in the process of besieging it, they ran out of food to scavenge and ended up starting to.
So what you're saying is they picked a spot where they would be able to dig in their feet more equitably for a place that there was absolutely no way to dig in their feet, that they would have to break through or get fucked. And they got fucked.
Right, yeah. Yeah. And another thing was Damascus is to the east of Jerusalem. And so their route, when they were on the western part of the walls, um, Jerusalem was to their back. And so they had a direct route back to where they came from, so it would be easy to retreat if they needed to. On the east side, they had the entire city in the way. And so if say another army happened to come along, they could go along to the west side and cut off their only route. So yeah, so exactly what I said would happen did in fact happen. Some Seljuk reinforcements arrived. They cut off the western approach to Damascus, and the Crusaders ended up having to. They managed to escape. They broke the siege and managed to escape back to Jerusalem, but they had to wander through like wilderness, like off the road. Were starving and being harassed the entire way back. So it was a really slow retreat, and they were being killed and starving to death the entire way back. It was brutal. They lost I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but there was several thousand people, possibly like over 10,000 people just fucking died without a battle. There wasn't a battle. Yeah, there wasn't a battle. They just, when they realized they were cut off, they just broke the siege and found any route home that they had access to.
So they just full on say, "Fuck this shit, I'm going home."
Yeah, and the process of getting to that, like there was a lot of fighting back and forth between all of the different generals. They, for what it's worth, they had been more like the two main guys involved in this were Louis the Seventh and Conrad of King of Germany. And they had been working pretty well together, along with all of like the minor nobles that were kind of commanding with them during and then in the immediate aftermath of the siege of Damascus. Their entire structure just fucking fell apart. They were constantly fighting at each other's throats. They couldn't work with it. They make it back to Jerusalem with extremely heavy casualties. So yeah, they make it back to Jerusalem, and then the army dissolves, and that's it. That's the end of the crusade.
That's it?
Yeah, that's the Second Crusade.
I felt like there'd be more build-up. It's just failure after failure after failure.
Yeah.
And changing the goalpost.
Yeah. They changed the goalpost to something more difficult and then quit after they lost once.
Jesus Christ.
They arrived back at Jerusalem on July 28th, 1148.
Oh, you said this was just like the First Crusade, right?
Yeah, I did. Okay.
Cheers.
Prost. Let's talk about the aftermath.
What happened in the aftermath, Derek?
Most of the Crusaders, they stuck around for a little bit, even though the army was essentially gone by this point. They were still sticking around in Jerusalem. Conrad and the German part of the army half-heartedly tried to do something else with this, the whole crusade thing, and they tried to capture the city of Ascalon, which...
So is that 2.5?
I'd say it's like the epilogue to the Second Crusade. They tried to capture the city of Ascalon, which was held by Egypt later on in that year, 1148. But yeah, they tried to capture Ascalon, which is like a port city south of Jerusalem. It was controlled by Egypt, the Sultanate of Egypt. The Conrad tried to capture the city of Ascalon, but that didn't go anywhere. He failed, and so he just went home. Louis and Eleanor went home. They would eventually go home later on in 1149. Their marriage just completely in tatters because they were fighting the entire time they were in the Holy Land. And a few years later, in 1152, their marriage would be officially annulled, and then she would go on to marry the King of England and have a son who would also become a famous. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, her later marriage would produce Richard the Lionheart, which will be a big character in our next Crusader episode. So this crusade further very much hurt the Byzantine Empire. They didn't come out of this looking very good. So that whole thing about allying with the Sultanate of Rum while they were kicking the ass out of all of the German army. A lot of people took that as Manuel the First, the Emperor of the Byzantines, was actually secretly colluding with all of the Muslim powers to defeat the Crusaders. That's how that was interpreted. Yeah, so just like the First Crusade, this was very bad for the reputation of the Byzantine Empire.
It sounds like someone got slandered with each of the first two Crusades at the least. Is this like a running theme throughout the Crusades? Someone gets slandered?
It only gets worse for the Byzantines. It's always the Byzantines, and every time it gets worse. So the last little bit, Baldwin III took on like a more aggressive foreign policy because now there were a lot of Muslim forces in that region that were much more hostile towards kingdom than had been previous.
Rightfully so.
And so he went on like this sort of campaign to kind of, conquer a little bit more land to kind of strengthen his position in the area. And one of the things he did was that in 1153, he actually went and conquered that city I mentioned before, Ascalon. He actually managed to get it. He got Ascalon from Egypt. That pissed off Egypt, and they wanted Ascalon back. And so that kind of forced Egypt into the sort of game of the geopolitical game of the Crusades. They became a much more involved figure in like the political maneuvering of the Crusades instead of just a periphery sort. And then a couple decades later, you would get a guy come to power and be declared the Sultan, who was actually the son of one of the generals who drove off the Crusaders at the siege of Damascus. His son became the Sultan of Egypt. And this guy was named Salah al-Din, or better known in English, or in English as Saladin. And Saladin is going to be the overall commander of all of the Muslim forces. And he's going to get involved specifically because of this conflict that's created over Ascalon with the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And Saladin is arguably one of the greatest military minds in the Middle Ages. But yeah, like the two most famous figures ever in all of the Crusades are both involved in the Third Crusade. It is Richard the Lionheart and his sort of like arch rival Saladin. Yeah, that's basically the big important result of the Second Crusade is that the Kingdom of Jerusalem adopts a more aggressive foreign policy, which draws Egypt into the geopolitics of the Crusader States, right as Salah al-Din is coming to power in Egypt, which then leads directly into the Third Crusade. So yeah, that's what I've got on the Second Crusade. So what did you think about that absolute disappointment of a story?
I genuinely don't know how the Pope considered that a crusade, because nothing beneficial happened for the church.
Oh, it was declared a crusade. You don't declare something a crusade after it's happened. You declare a crusade happens because the Pope declares a crusade and calls on Christendom to take an armed pilgrimage to the Holy.
So where are your sources this week, Derek?
My source. So the book that I used it's one of the sources that I use for basically like an anthology of all of the Crusades in order. So the source I used was God's War, Christopher Tyerman. God's War by Christopher. Yeah, you got anything else to mention? Any thoughts on?
Other than being disappointed that this was called Crusade, no. What about you, Derek?
Just that I'm looking forward to future Crusades, because as much as I was entertained by the first Crusade, I think the first two Crusades are definitely the most boring ones. But I say that I don't actually know much about the first few, some of the later Crusades. But
awesome. So if they want to find you on social media, where can they find you, Derek?
They can find me on Twitter at Visigoth. The first I is a 1, the O is a 0. They can find me on Blue Sky at Visigoth. The O is a 0. The first I is Tim. Where can they find your stuff and all the podcast stuff?
So they can find me both on Twitter and the Blue Sky at Tim, aka Otis, and they can find us the podcast, on Twitter and Blue Sky at Alex Society Pod, at Facebook and Instagram at The Alexander Society Pod, and then on TikTok at Alexander Society, where we post our beer reviews and outtakes from each of the episodes and announcements of episode releases. We will see you next time. If you enjoyed what you listened to, please give us a rating or review on your streaming platform of choice.
Bye.